It was 2:13 a.m. when I stopped breathing. I heard my husband's voice through the dark, low and certain. It's time. The floorboards creaked like a warning. I lay still, eyes fixed on the ceiling, pretending sleep while every memory of our life played like a secret film. Outside, even the distant lights by the Statue of Liberty felt dull. My heart raced, not with fear of ghosts, but with the sudden icy sense that the man beside me planned something that would change everything. Stay with me, like, subscribe, and listen till the end, please, and share. That night felt different from the moment the sun went down. The house had a strange stillness, the kind that settles over a place when it is holding a secret. I had been noticing odd movements for weeks. The soft shuffle of feet outside my door, the creak of floorboards in the hallway long after everyone should have been asleep, the faint click of the study door opening and closing at nearly the same hour every night. Each sound had carved a small space of worry in my mind, but I kept pushing it aside, as older women often do, telling myself I was imagining things or letting the wind play tricks on me. But that evening, there was something in the air. A tension that made even the curtains seem still, as if the entire house was holding its breath. I crawled into bed earlier than usual, my thoughts heavy with questions I hadn't dared to ask. The lamp cast a warm glow in the room, but even that comfort felt thin, like a blanket stretched too far. My husband walked in quietly, not saying much, not meeting my eyes the way he used to. My son had gone to his room without a word too, shutting his door with a softness that felt intentional. Everything was soft, too soft. The way people move when they don't want to be heard. I slipped under the covers and closed my eyes, but I didn't let myself drift. I lay still, waiting. My breathing was slow and even, the way it sounds when someone is fully asleep. My hands were tucked beneath the blanket, but my ears were wide open, straining for any sound, any clue, any shift in the air. My heart beat so loudly inside my chest that I worried it might give me away, but the darkness around me stayed silent for a long time, long enough that I almost believed nothing would happen. Then it began. First came the faintest whisper of movement, a tiny click, like someone turning a doorknob very slowly. My muscles tensed, but I kept my eyelids shut. The door to our bedroom opened a sliver, and through my lashes, barely parted, I could see a thin line of hallway light slip into the room. Footsteps followed, soft but certain, like someone who knew exactly where to step to avoid the creaky boards. The air shifted in the room, and I could feel my husband standing beside the bed, watching me. The weight of his stare pressed down on me, as if his eyes alone could pin me to the mattress. Then he leaned closer, so close I could feel the warmth of his breath near my ear. For a moment, I thought he was checking whether I was really asleep. And then, in a voice so low it barely rose above a breath, he whispered two words that froze every drop of blood inside my body. It's time. Time for what? Time for who? Time for something planned, something coordinated, something they needed me unconscious for? A chill ran from my scalp to my toes. Every suspicion I had ignored around the house, every missing paper, every late-night whisper, every secretive glance between him and our son, crashed down on me all at once. My mind raced as I kept my breathing calm, pretending to be in a deep, peaceful sleep. But inside, my pulse pounded so violently I thought the sound might fill the room. I listened as my husband moved away from the bed, his feet sliding quietly along the floor. He didn't head toward the bathroom or to get a drink of water, the usual nightly patterns. Instead, I heard him step into the hallway and softly call our son's name, not loud enough to wake me, just loud enough for the boy to hear. Then came another whisper, my son's voice this time, hushed, urgent, excited even. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone alone made my skin crawl. The two of them moved down the hallway together, their voices dipping in and out of the silence. I strained to hear, my thoughts twisting into every dark possibility. What were they doing that required me asleep? What were they planning? And why did my husband sound so sure, so prepared, as if this moment had been rehearsed? Minutes passed, long enough to make my body ache from staying still. Then I heard something else, a faint metallic clink, the rustle of papers, and what sounded like a drawer being opened carefully. They weren't going to the kitchen or the garage. They were going into the study, the room my husband always kept locked, the room he said was for bills and paperwork, the room he didn't want anyone else going into. The whispers grew louder once they were inside, not the words, but the rhythm, sharp, deliberate, urgent. My heart hammered, my ears buzzed. I knew, with a sinking certainty, that whatever was happening behind that study door was meant to change something, maybe everything, in my life. And as I lay there pretending to sleep, muscles tight and breath steady, I also knew this, whatever "it's time" meant. It wasn't meant for my ears, but I had heard it anyway. That was the moment everything changed. I stayed completely still under the blanket, afraid that even the smallest movement would give me away. His footsteps were slow and careful, nothing like the normal shuffle he used when getting a glass of water at night. These steps were planned, steady, almost rehearsed. It felt like I was lying inches away from a stranger, not the man I had lived with for almost my entire life. He moved around the room with a strange confidence, as if my sleep had become his permission to finally show who he truly was. I could hear him breathing, calm, controlled. Even as my heart pounded so hard, I thought he would hear it thumping through the mattress. There was something deeply unsettling about the way he carried himself. My husband had always been a nervous man, shaky hands and soft steps, but tonight, everything was different. His breathing had no hesitation. His movements had no stumbles. It was like he had been waiting for this moment for a long time. I lay there frozen, afraid to open my eyes, but even more afraid to close them. Every sound felt louder. Every second felt heavier. My body became rigid, my senses sharp, and a cold sweat covered my skin as I listened to him quietly walking around our bedroom in the dark. A faint click echoed near the dresser. I knew that sound. It was the drawer he always kept locked, a drawer he had told me never to touch, a drawer he claimed held old papers and boring things. Now I knew that wasn't true. Hearing him unlock it in the middle of the night confirmed every suspicion I had tried to ignore. My breath caught in my throat as I realized he had waited until he thought I was asleep to access it. Not earlier in the evening, not in the daytime, only when he believed I was unconscious and unaware. As he opened the drawer fully, I heard the faint rustle of paper, then a pause, a long, thoughtful pause. It was the kind of pause a person makes when deciding something important, something dangerous. When he finally moved again, I sensed a shift in the air, a calmness that felt too deliberate, like he knew exactly what he was doing and exactly why he was doing it. That calmness scared me more than any shout or argument ever could. I lay there trying to process everything. The late-night calls I pretended not to hear, the sudden silences when I walked into a room, the whispering between him and our son that always stopped the moment I appeared, the locked drawer, the missing mail, the strange receipts. Everything that I had brushed away now came back in full force, forming a picture I didn't want to accept. A picture of two people, my husband and son, working together on something they didn't want me to know about. He closed the drawer with another soft click, and for a moment, the room fell silent again. Then I heard him exhale, not nervous or guilty, but with the quiet satisfaction of someone who believed everything was under control. That single breath told me more than words ever could. It carried confidence, even triumph. It was the breath of a man who thought he had fooled me, the breath of a man who believed I was asleep and powerless. Fear lingered in my chest, but beneath it grew something else, a cold, steady anger. A realization that the two people I trusted most had chosen secrets over honesty, deception over loyalty, and quiet betrayal over love. I lay there feeling the weight of this discovery settle deep in my bones. He wasn't startled. He wasn't conflicted. He wasn't worried I might wake up. That confidence confirmed everything. He expected me to stay unaware, silent, and controlled. and that expectation cut deeper than anything else. He walked out of the room without looking back, closing the door with a careful softness, a softness that wasn't kindness. It was calculation. When the door clicked shut, a deep stillness filled the room. I finally opened my eyes, the darkness no longer comforting. I stared at the ceiling with a heart full of questions and a mind racing with possibilities. I wasn't safe, I wasn't respected, and I wasn't imagining any of it. That moment, lying alone in the dark, fully awake, fully aware, fully betrayed, was the moment everything changed. My life didn't split apart with shouting or chaos. It split open in the quietest way possible. A whisper, a drawer, a breath, a calmness that didn't belong to a loving husband. In that still, silent room, I understood one thing clearly. I had just seen the beginning of something far more dangerous than I ever expected, and the people I trusted most were at the center of it. For most of my life, I believed trust was something that stayed solid once it was earned. I believed that when you built a marriage over many decades, surviving sickness, financial struggles, raising children, and standing together through every hardship, the foundation became unbreakable. I believed my husband was the one person who would never betray me. That belief carried me through early mornings, making breakfast before work, long nights watching our son sleep when he was sick, and quiet evenings where we sat on the porch talking about the future. But looking back now, I can see how blind I was to the slow changes that crept in, small shifts that seemed harmless at first, but were actually early warnings of the deception that eventually shattered everything. For years, I noticed little things that didn't feel right. The late-night phone calls he would take outside, even in the cold. The way he would angle his body away from me whenever he read a message. The new habit of locking his study door, something he never used to do. He had always been transparent, always open about his work and his plans, but suddenly, everything he touched had a layer of secrecy around it. When I asked simple questions like who called or why he needed to step outside, he brushed me off with vague answers, saying it was nothing important. I wanted to believe him, so I trained myself to ignore the uneasy feeling that started growing inside my chest. The biggest shift happened around the time our son became older. They started spending long hours together, whispering about things they didn't want me to hear. I thought maybe they were planning something kind for me, or maybe they were having father-son talks that didn't concern me. I tried not to pry. I told myself men often keep certain things between themselves, but each whisper, each closed door, each shared glance that shut me out made me feel like I was slowly becoming a stranger in my own home. I still didn't suspect anything serious. I thought it was just the natural distance that happens in families as children grow older and partners fall into routines. Then there were the late-night errands he claimed were necessary. He would put on his shoes quietly after he thought I had fallen asleep, move through the house with careful steps, and return an hour or two later, smelling faintly of cold air and nervous energy. When I tried to ask him about these trips, he always had a simple explanation ready. A friend needed help, or he had forgotten something at the office. He delivered the words smoothly, with the confidence of someone who had practiced. I believed him every time, because believing the lie was easier than imagining something darker. Some nights, I woke to the sound of drawers opening or papers rustling. At the time, I thought he was simply looking for something he misplaced. Now I understand those nights differently. He wasn't searching, he was hiding. Every locked drawer, every missing document, every hastily closed cabinet was part of a secret he was carefully protecting from me. My trust allowed him to work in the shadows without question. I never thought a day would come when I would see him standing in a dark hallway, carrying something sharp and whispering words that made my blood run cold. But that moment had deep roots I had ignored for far too long. Looking back, the small signs were endless. Receipts for items I didn't recognize. A strange hesitation when I walked into the room unexpectedly. Sudden trips that didn't match his work schedule. A growing coldness in his voice whenever I asked about our finances. Even our son had changed, mirroring his father's secrecy. They became a pair, moving together as if they shared a hidden world. It was only later that I realized they truly did. A world built on deception, a world where I wasn't meant to be included. The trust I gave freely had become a curtain, something they used to hide behind. I thought marriage was a partnership, a bond built through years of loyalty. Instead, it became a shield that protected their lies. I had ignored the small clues for so long that by the time I finally opened my eyes, the truth was already a fully formed storm waiting to tear through everything I thought was real. That night, when I pretended to sleep and listen to his whisper, the years of doubt, fear, and small warnings finally connected. Every quiet phone call, every locked drawer, every shift in his behavior had been pointing toward that single moment, and once I realized what he had been planning, I knew my life would never go back to the way it had been. In the days leading up to that night, I kept noticing more little things that did not sit right with me. They were small on their own, so ordinary that anyone else might have ignored them. But when you live with someone for decades, you learn their rhythm, their habits, their patterns. And when that rhythm changes, even a small detail feels like a warning. I started realizing that my husband's movements, his reactions, even the way he handled simple things around the house, were not lining up with the man I had lived beside for almost my whole life. It was as if he had become someone else when he thought I wasn't watching. It began with missing papers, important ones. Bank statements I knew had arrived, but suddenly were not where we always kept them. Receipts that disappeared overnight. Documents that used to be filed neatly, now shuffled, bent, or half hidden in places he thought I would never check. I asked myself whether I was forgetting things, but deep down, I knew I wasn't. My memory was still sharp. Something was happening behind my back, and he was hoping I wouldn't notice. Then came the missing keys. The spare set we kept in the kitchen drawer vanished, and when I asked my husband about it casually, he acted confused. But his confusion wasn't real confusion. It was too quick, too rehearsed. He shrugged too easily. He brushed it off with a calmness that made my stomach twist. Later that evening, I found the keys tucked into the pocket of his coat, a coat he rarely wore. It didn't make sense, unless he was hiding things on purpose. Every day seemed to bring another tiny detail that chipped away at the peace I once knew. The garage door would be left cracked open even though he always closed it. His shoes were sometimes muddy late at night, even though he claimed he hadn't left the house. His shirt smelled faintly of something I couldn't place. Not perfume, not sweat, but something metallic, like machinery or dust. My heart started to ache with a growing sense of confusion, as if I was living with a stranger who looked like my husband but no longer felt like him. There were unexplained errands, trips he said he had to make, always late in the evening, always short, always suspiciously without detail. When he came back, he moved quietly, slipping through the house as if he didn't want to be heard. And then there were phone calls. Quick ones, whispered ones, ones that ended the second I walked into the room. He kept his phone on, silent every night. He never used to do that. The way he held it close, almost glued to his hand, made me realize something had changed in a way that was not innocent. The nights became the worst. Every time I drifted towards sleep, I heard faint noises, soft footsteps, drawers opening, papers rustling. When I sat up, the noises stopped. When I lay back down, they started again. I knew what he was doing. He was waiting for me to sleep so he could move freely through the house, thinking I was unaware. My chest tightened with a mix of fear and anger, and with each passing night, the tension inside me grew. I felt like someone was slowly peeling away the truth, and I was helplessly watching, unable to grasp the full picture. The tension didn't stop at noises. The atmosphere in the house changed. The walls felt different, as if holding secrets within them. Even the air seemed heavier. I started to feel like I was walking through fog. The same rooms I had lived in for decades now felt unfamiliar, and he didn't look at me the same way. His eyes felt distant, unreadable, almost cold. He spoke less, moved differently, avoided ordinary conversations. He didn't ask how my day was. He didn't show the smallest warmth. Everything in him felt guarded, locked, hidden. And my son. He began acting strangely too. When they thought I wasn't paying attention, I saw them whispering together, huddled over something at the dining table late at night. When I entered the room, they both straightened too quickly. My son forced a smile. My husband said he was just helping with something unimportant, but I could feel the tension between them, a shared secret, a shared intention, something that excluded me entirely. These small signs, each one like a drop of water wearing down rock, kept building inside me until I felt an almost unbearable pressure. The fear wasn't sharp, it was slow, creeping, like a shadow moving across the floor. It wrapped around me day after day, night after night, until I could no longer convince myself it was nothing. Something was happening behind my back, something I wasn't meant to know. And every small clue pointed me toward one realization. Whatever my husband whispered, "It's time for," it wasn't good. That night, as I lay still with my eyes half closed, I watched him move across the room with a purpose I had never seen before. He didn't walk like a tired husband getting up for a glass of water. He moved like a man following a plan he had been rehearsing for a long time. Every step was slow, careful, and silent. I felt my heart beating hard in my chest, but I forced myself not to move. I kept my breathing steady, pretending to be in deep sleep, even though my mind raced with fear and questions I didn't want answers to. I saw the faint glow of the hallway light fall across his face, and for the first time in our marriage, I didn't recognize him. He bent down by the dresser, the same dresser we had shared for decades, and slid open the bottom drawer, the one he had kept locked for the last few months. I had always assumed it was papers from his office or things he didn't want cluttering the top. But now, watching him pull out a small metal object wrapped in cloth, I realized it was something far more serious. Even from the bed, I saw a glint, a shine that didn't belong to anything innocent. My breath caught in my throat, and I had to remind myself not to react. I lay frozen, the weight of fear pressing down on me harder than any nightmare. He unwrapped it slowly, and though I couldn't see the full object, I saw enough. Silver, smooth, sharp-edged. Something meant for harm or secrecy. Nothing a husband should hide from his wife of over 40 years. In that moment, I knew this wasn't about a simple secret or a harmless plan. Something darker had been brewing in this house, under my roof, right next to me every night, and I had been sleeping beside it. He held the object up toward the small lamp on his side of the room, checking it carefully, like a man making sure his tool was ready. His hands didn't shake, his breathing stayed calm. He looked like someone preparing for an important task, not someone acting out of panic or impulse. That cold calmness made my body tense even more. A man who is panicked is unpredictable, but a man who is calm about something dangerous, that is far worse. He stood up and slowly walked toward the hallway. I waited until his footsteps faded, then slipped out of bed with the quietest movement I could manage. My legs felt weak, but fear kept me steady. I followed him at a distance, my bare feet making no sound on the floorboards. I stopped at the doorway and watched him disappear into the study downstairs. I waited a moment, counting the seconds to steady my mind, then crept down the stairs one step at a time, praying the wood wouldn't creak. I reached the bottom and peeked around the corner. What I saw chilled me to the bone. He had the study door slightly open, and the dim yellow lamp on his desk lit up the entire room. On the table were stacks of papers he must have been gathering in secret for months, documents with signatures, bank transfers, insurance forms, maps, and old family photographs. At the center of the table was a thick envelope, worn around the edges, the same envelope I had once kept in our safe for emergencies. I hadn't seen it in years, and next to it, lying open, was the metal object he had carried from the drawer. I watched him sit down, flip through a notebook, and cross out a long list of names and items. My name was at the top. My stomach twisted. A person doesn't cross out a spouse's name at midnight unless something terrible is planned. He kept whispering under his breath, too quiet for me to hear, but the intensity in his expression made my skin crawl. This wasn't a random moment. This was a plan, detailed, prepared, and carried out step by step. I backed away before he could notice me. Every part of me wanted to run, scream, or confront him in the heat of fear, but something stronger held me still, the understanding that I needed proof, clarity, and support. This wasn't a fight I could win alone. I crept back upstairs, lay in bed, and closed my eyes tightly, as if still asleep when he returned. I felt him slide under the covers beside me. He exhaled deeply, calm again, as if the man I had seen in the study didn't exist. But he did. And now I knew the truth, or at least enough of it to know my life was changing forever. This was no misunderstanding, no harmless secret. This was betrayal wrapped in danger, and the night was only beginning. When I finally gathered the courage to push myself up from the edge of the hallway wall, my hands were shaking so hard I had to steady them on the door frame. The house was silent, but not peacefully so. It was the kind of silence that felt staged, like someone had forced the air itself to stay still. I moved forward inch by inch, terrified that a single creak of the floor might give me away. As I peered through the barely opened doorway, the dim light from the lamp on the study desk flickered just enough to reveal the truth I had been too afraid to imagine. My husband wasn't just pacing or planning something harmless. He was sitting in the center of the room with boxes spread around him. Boxes I had never seen before. Boxes he must have hidden away deliberately. One was filled with documents sealed in plastic sleeves, each labeled with dates that made my stomach twist. Years that meant something. Years tied to events I remembered vividly, but never questioned. The second box held photographs, dozens and dozens of them. At first, I thought they were old family photos, but when he lifted a handful into the light, I saw unfamiliar faces, strangers, all connected to him in ways that weren't innocent. He had been living an entirely separate life, one I had never seen, one he had built quietly while lying beside me every night. Then I saw the envelope, the same envelope he had slipped away with several times at night. Inside were bank papers, account statements I had never known existed, and a small notebook filled with handwriting so precise it chilled my bones. Names, addresses, transactions, dates. Every page showed a life I had not been invited into. He had been creating a network behind my back, moving money, contacting people secretly, shaping plans that had nothing to do with our home, our family, or the life we built. But what broke me wasn't the money or the lies. It was the single photograph lying face up on the desk. My son, our boy. The image was one I didn't even remember being taken. He was young, smiling softly at the camera, unaware his future would be twisted into someone else's secret plan. Below the photo, written in my husband's own handwriting, were cold, deliberate notes, not about love, not about memories, but about preparation, timing, and removal from obligations. My breath froze in my throat as my mind tried to understand the meaning. My husband hadn't just been hiding financial secrets or meeting strangers in the night. He had been preparing something involving our son, something planned, something calculated. I reached for the edge of the desk instinctively, needing something solid to hold on to. But before I could steady myself, another discovery caught my eye, a small stack of letters tucked under the notebook. They were all addressed to the same person, someone I had never heard of, and inside each one were words that shattered what little hope I had left. Promises, confessions, instructions, all written in the tone of a man I no longer recognized. He wasn't the husband I thought I married. He wasn't the father I believed he was. He was someone else entirely, someone capable of deceit so deep that I could feel the foundation of my life cracking beneath me. Then came the final blow, a contract buried at the bottom of the box, signed, stamped. His signature looped across the bottom in a way I knew well, but the content, it took everything in me not to gasp out loud. It outlined a plan that explained the late-night whispers, the hidden drawers, the strange meetings, and the sudden changes I had ignored for years. He had been preparing to cut me out of everything: the house, the savings, the family records, and all of it was structured around a decision he intended to execute when the time was right. And that's when his whisper finally made sense. It's time. Those words weren't random. They weren't harmless. They were the signal for the final step in a plan he had been building piece by piece while I lived beside him, blind to the truth. My legs nearly collapsed beneath me as the realization settled like ice in my chest. He had waited for me to fall asleep every night to continue constructing a future that didn't include me, and possibly didn't include our son long before his fate was sealed. I pulled myself away from the door, forcing my breath to quiet, forcing my mind to steady. I knew now that the truth was worse than betrayal. It was a calculated erasure, a life rewritten without me, a future designed behind my back. And now that I knew, I had only one option left: expose everything. I waited until morning because darkness gives cowards excuses, and I wanted none left for him. The sun had just begun to push its pale light through the curtains when I sat at the kitchen table, every piece of evidence laid out in front of me: documents, photographs, bank records, timestamps, and the notes I had taken through trembling hands in the middle of the night. My heart beat slowly, not with fear now, but with clarity. The woman I was before last night, trusting, patient, forgiving, no longer existed. I had been remade by betrayal, shaped by shock, and now steadied by purpose. When he walked in, sleepy and stretching as if the world was normal, he didn't expect to see me awake. He certainly didn't expect to see the table full of his secrets staring him in the face. At first he froze in the doorway, almost like a child caught stealing from a jar. His eyes slid from the papers to my face, then back again, as if his brain couldn't choose what to fear more. I didn't speak. I didn't flinch. I simply waited, letting the silence hold him in place. Finally, he tried to smile, that same cold, practiced smile he'd used for months, and muttered something about being up early. But the smile didn't hold. The sight of the evidence slowly drained the color from his face, stripping away the mask he had worn for so long. All that remained was the truth of who he had become. "You knew," he finally whispered, his voice cracking in a way I had never heard before. It wasn't remorse, it was fear. He was afraid of exposure, afraid of consequences, afraid that the world he thought he controlled was slipping away from him. Because it was, I nodded slowly, keeping my composure. My hands were steady, my voice even. "I know everything." I watched as my words hit him like blows. He blinked hard, swallowed, tried to gather himself. But there was no version of this conversation where he regained control. For the first time in a long time, the balance of power in our house was in my hands, and he could feel it. He stammered excuses, reaching for explanations he hadn't prepared well enough. He blamed stress, work, misunderstandings, even me, as if shifting blame would somehow erase the sleepless nights, the locked drawers, the midnight whispers. But I didn't argue with him. I didn't remind him of the lies he had told or the trust he had broken. I didn't give him the luxury of a debate. Instead, I calmly slid the folder toward him. Everything in his own handwriting, every signature, every timestamp. Proof he couldn't deny. His shoulders sagged as the facade slipped entirely. He knew there was no way out. Then I gave him the choice, the only choice he would get from me ever again. "You will confess," I said quietly, "and you will face the consequences with a shred of dignity, or I will take this entire file to the police, the bank, the lawyer, and every person who deserves the truth." The words didn't need to be shouted. Spoken softly, they carried more weight. He looked at me like he didn't recognize who I was anymore. But the irony was that he had created this version of me. Every lie, every secret, every whispered "it's time" had built the woman sitting in front of him now, calm and unafraid. He tried once more to salvage control, raising his voice, insisting I was overreacting, claiming I had misunderstood. But I didn't let the noise shake me. I simply pushed the recording device across the table, the one I had used the night before, capturing every word he thought I was too asleep to hear. The moment he saw it, he broke. His eyes dropped to the floor, his breathing grew uneven, and in that cracking of his voice, in that collapse of his false confidence, I saw the truth. He wasn't shocked that I had caught him. He was shocked that I had finally stopped excusing him. I leaned back in my chair and let him feel the weight of his choices. For years, he had relied on my softness, my silence, my willingness to believe the best in him. But now he was faced with a different version of me, a woman who had seen everything, who had heard everything, who had stopped pretending to sleep through what was destroying her home, and there was no going back. The ultimatum remained on the table, simple and clear. Take responsibility now, or lose everything later. For the first time in decades, he understood that I wasn't asking. I was deciding. When the sun rose the next morning, the house felt different. Not because anything had changed physically, but because I had changed. For the first time in months, maybe years, I walked through those familiar rooms with clarity instead of confusion. I wasn't the frightened woman who lay frozen in the dark, pretending to sleep while her own husband whispered secret plans. I was the woman who had seen the truth with her own eyes, gathered proof, and stood tall with the support of people who truly loved me. And now, it was time for consequences. Not emotional ones, but real ones. The kind that carried weight and could not be undone with apologies or excuses. Our lawyer arrived early, carrying a briefcase heavy with documents, photographs, financial statements, letters, and the evidence I had managed to collect from the study the night before. My niece sat beside me at the kitchen table, her steady presence reminding me that I was not alone in this. Every breath I took felt sharp, like the air carried a new kind of freedom. It was still painful, yes, betrayal always is, but hidden beneath the pain was strength. When my husband came downstairs, he looked startled to see us all gathered. Perhaps he expected breakfast as usual, or the same gentle silence I had always given him, but not today. I asked him to sit, and he did, slowly, warily, like a man sensing a storm he could no longer escape. I placed the folder in front of him. His eyes flicked through the papers, the bank statements he had hidden, the secret plans he had kept locked away, the items I'd photographed in the middle of the night. The confident mask he always wore finally cracked. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. And for once, I didn't rush to ease his discomfort. I let the silence settle, heavy and deserved. The lawyer spoke first, her voice calm but firm. She outlined each violation, each act of deception, each breach of trust, not from anger, but from cold, undeniable fact. There was no way for him to argue against evidence laid so clearly in front of him. My husband tried to defend himself at first, making weak excuses, blaming stress, blaming other people, even daring to imply that I had misunderstood everything. But every sentence he tried to build fell apart under the weight of proof. Eventually, the fight left his body, his shoulders slumped, his eyes dropped to the table. I told him plainly, with the steadiness I didn't know I still had, that this house, this family, and this life would no longer be his to manipulate. I explained that the next steps had already been set in motion. Legal filings were prepared. Accounts were frozen. The plans he had whispered about in the dark were now fully exposed. There was nothing left for him to hide behind, no shadow left for him to retreat into. The truth was out, and the law was moving. He was served with papers before he even stood up from the table. For a long moment, he simply stared at them. Then he looked at me, really looked at me, as if seeing someone he didn't recognize. Maybe he expected tears, or begging, or anger, but betrayal changes a person. It strips away illusions. I wasn't the woman he used to manipulate with charm or intimidation. I was the woman who had woken up to the truth and decided to act. By noon, he had packed a single bag and left the house, escorted by an officer to ensure nothing else disappeared. The door closed behind him, and the silence that followed wasn't frightening, it was cleansing. It felt like the first deep breath after being underwater too long. The courts moved quickly once all evidence was submitted. His financial schemes were dismantled. His secret arrangements were exposed. Assets he tried to hide were recovered. Every layer of deception he had built began to collapse, one by one, under scrutiny. It wasn't revenge. It was consequence, long overdue and absolutely necessary. That night, as I sat alone in the living room, the same spot where I once listened to him whisper, "It's time," I felt the weight of everything settle in my chest. But it wasn't despair. It was release. The betrayal still hurt. Betrayal always leaves a mark. But the fear was gone. I had taken control back, piece by piece, and now the home felt like mine again. Safe, quiet, honest. Justice hadn't come with shouting or chaos. It came with steady action, clear proof, and unshakable determination. And as I turned off the lights and finally allowed myself to rest, I realized something powerful. Sometimes the strongest resolution isn't dramatic confrontation. It's the quiet reclaiming of your own life, one truth at a time. When everything finally settled, the house felt different. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was steady, honest, and mine. For the first few days, I walked through each room slowly, trying to understand how many moments I had lived without truly seeing what was happening under my own roof. Betrayal doesn't arrive in one blow. It creeps in through whispers, late nights, locked drawers, and secrets spoken in the dark. That night, when I pretended to sleep, had shown me a simple truth. Sometimes the people closest to us are the ones who assume we will never look, never question, never fight back. But they forget something. Age does not dull instinct. If anything, it sharpens it. I learned that the hard way. In the weeks that followed, I began rebuilding my life piece by piece. I changed passwords, secured financial records, met with the lawyer regularly, and cleaned out the study where I had watched my husband move with such cold purpose. Every document I found reminded me of how deeply he had underestimated me. He had planned everything with such precision, thinking I would stay blind, thinking I would stay quiet. But the moment I heard him whisper, "It's time," something inside me woke up, a strength I hadn't felt in years. I realized I had spent too long believing that loyalty meant blindness. It doesn't. Loyalty means truth. And if someone can't give you truth, then they do not deserve your loyalty. My niece visited often, bringing warmth and light back into the home. She would sit with me at the kitchen table, helping me sort through papers, court documents, statements, dates. Sometimes she would pause and look at me with quiet admiration. She saw strength where I still felt a bruise. She once said, "You didn't just protect yourself. You protected what's left of this family." Those words stayed with me. I hadn't thought of it that way. I had acted because I had to. Because if I didn't stand up at that moment, everything I had built over a lifetime would be stolen or destroyed. Some nights, I sat in the living room with the lamp on, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, letting the peace settle in slowly. I wasn't afraid of the dark anymore, not after what I had faced. The shadows didn't scare me. Lies did. And I had already dragged the worst lies into the light. Sometimes the real haunting isn't a ghost or a noise in the night. It's the sudden realization that someone you trust has been building a world behind your back. But even that kind of haunting loses its power once confronted. I also understood something important. Forgiveness is not required to heal. I didn't have to forgive what he did. I didn't have to soften the truth or rewrite it to sound polite. What he did was deliberate. What he planned was cruel. But I didn't carry anger. I carried clarity. And clarity is far more powerful. It frees you. It loosens the grip of fear. It lets you breathe again. After the legal matters were handled and his plans dismantled, I allowed myself to move forward without rushing. Healing doesn't follow a clock. It arrives in quiet moments. A morning coffee that tastes better than usual. A drawer that no longer hides secrets. A night where sleep comes easily for the first time in months. My family noticed the change in me. My granddaughter hugged me tighter. My daughter checked in more often. They all thought I had survived something dark, and they were right. But they didn't know the part that mattered most. The night I pretended to sleep, I discovered not just betrayal. I discovered my own strength. I discovered that age doesn't make you weak. It makes you wise enough to see through lies and brave enough to face them. Sometimes I walk past the bedroom door and pause, remembering the exact moment I heard him whisper those two words. It's time. Even now, the memory sends a chill through me, but not the same kind of chill. Now, it's a reminder that instincts save lives, that silence can be a warning, and that pretending to sleep can show you the truth you were never meant to see. If there is one message I hope anyone learns from my story, it is this: never doubt your intuition, never ignore your unease, and never believe you are too old or too fragile to face the truth. That night could have broken me. Instead, it built me into someone stronger, someone watchful, someone unafraid. I faced betrayal, unmasked deception, and reclaimed my life. My home is peaceful again, not because nothing will ever go wrong, but because I now trust myself enough to face anything that does. And that, I've learned, is the real redemption.